So for week 11, we are going to be working through chapter 15, and you'll be learning how to code procedures, which are similar to scripts, but you actually save the script with the database so that you can execute it again. You will also be creating your own functions, and you'll be creating triggers. And triggers are actually pretty cool because you set up some code that will automatically run when a user inserts data, updates data, or deletes data. So the lecture basically covers these three areas, and these are all considered DDL statements because they're objects that are stored with the database itself. Okay, so there are some similarities and differences between stored procedures, user-defined functions, and triggers. So that is kind of covered at the introduction here at the top. And then we just differentiate basically between scripts, which we covered last week, and stored procedures, user-defined functions, and triggers. So the textbook assignment is obviously going to be practicing the stored procedures, UDFs, user-defined functions, and triggers. And so the first section is the longest. It covers stored procedures. The reason that this is actually longer is that stored procedures can accept data, and you can also return data, and you can have output variables. So they're a little bit more complicated. So we just kind of start out with something pretty basic, and then you get into more options, and you'll also get into creating the input and output parameters, and then we get into actually returning data. So you'll see how all of this works in an execute statement. And there are a lot of examples in here that you can take a look at, and some of them are Northwind examples. You could actually copy these and run them, just to give you an idea of what these do. Okay, the key points to remember are things that you should know about the procedures. And for your certification exam, make sure you know the difference between procedures and functions, because there will be a question or two on that. So the section on procedures is definitely the longest. We do incorporate try-catch into procedures. And then we talk about some procedures that are actually part of SQL Server. So they're system stored procedures that you can use. Then we get into user-defined functions, which are functions that you create. Several weeks ago, we used all sorts of different functions that come with SQL Server, and these are ones that you create. So if you've ever had a traditional programming class, you probably are familiar with functions already, and these are similar. In SQL Server, your functions will return either a scalar variable, which is a single value, or a table, which is multiple rows. Okay, so this section just teaches you about that. And again, there are little functions that you can run, plenty of examples that you can practice with. And then we get into triggers, which are actually one of my favorite things because it does take a while to set triggers up, but once you set them up, they're super cool because they automatically execute. And so if something is deleted, you can have the entire row written to an archive table, for example. Or if something is updated, you can have the old value and the new value written to a logging table where you're logging changes. Okay, so I find triggers super useful, and this just basically gives you information about that. And then I've got some examples that you can take a look at. So once you go through the lecture, you're going to work on your textbook assignment. And you'll notice we have 3 tasks, and I've got videos for each task. Now, stored procedures is probably the most complicated task, so I kind of broke those videos up for you. So you can see scenarios 1 and 2 are in the first video, scenarios 3 and 4 are in the second. So you can watch the videos. They will tell you exactly what you need to do to accomplish the tasks, and the directions are down here. So you're going to go through and create stored procedures. Then you're going to do user-defined functions. There's just a couple scenarios there. And then you're going to be creating some triggers. Once you complete the textbook assignment, then you're going to do the final project lab assignment. And this is going to be the last part of your final project. So to help you out, I did give you a little example of what I did for my fake bakery that I call Sugar Bakers. So I did some procedures. You know, if you look through here, you'll notice I have functions, and then at the bottom, I did the triggers. So this is, you're going to need to do something similar for your final project. And so you'll have to do a stored procedure that retrieves and displays data. So I didn't tell you how many, in fact, in this one, you don't have to have any parameters. Okay, so you can just do a simple select for this. Okay, this one should be pretty easy. Okay, because you don't have to have input and output parameters. The next one does require at least one input parameter. Okay, and then the third stored procedure should have at least one input parameter and one output parameter. You can have more than one, but you only need one. And then the last one, the stored procedure needs to have a return value. Now, remember return values, and you will learn this in the lecture demo and in your textbook assignment, but a return value has to be an integer. So keep that in mind, you know, when you are setting this up. So you have to do several stored procedures. The second and third one are the ones that need the parameters. The first one doesn't require any. Okay? And if you look at the example, you will see that my first one is super simple. I just did a select. There are no parameters. Okay, so when you're going through these, you do not need to do coding gymnastics. You can keep things really simple. And I would recommend keeping them simple, because if there's a problem, if it's simple, it's going to be easy to figure out. If you've got coding gymnastics going on, then it's a little harder to figure it out. You can see for this second one, I even put comments in here where I have an input parameter. You'll notice I just have one. Okay? I didn't do multiple. Okay? The requirement is to have at least one. Okay, so here's another one where we have an input parameter. And now I'm doing 3 output parameters. Do you need 3? No, you only need 1. I did 3 because it made sense. for what I am trying to do. I'm trying to do a customer contact list. So I wanted the first name, the last name, and the phone number. So whatever you are creating, you know, the output parameters you use need to make sense. So you'll see as you go through here that I did label all of these things so you could identify what they were. So between this example and the textbook assignment examples and the examples in the lecture, you hopefully will not have trouble completing this lab assignment. Because after you finish those stored procedures, you're going to do a couple user-defined functions. So the first one's going to be a scalar function, and then you're going to do a table function, and then you're going to create some triggers. Okay, and so this is the last part of your final project. And that is pretty much what you need to do for week 11. After week 11, all we have left is really the security piece, and that actually won't involve a whole lot of hands-on. There's a little hands-on with that, but most of our time will be putting together that final project, which if you've been keeping up, your final project will be pretty much done, okay? And then preparing for your certification exam. And as always, if you have problems, if you're confused, you have questions, please let me know. As you know, I do check my email on a regular basis.